Alright guys, so here's the review of the WM212. This is one of the few watches I've checked out from WM Watch, a couple of which I've got down here. And then this previous one that I reviewed, that did have some issues. So if you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link up on the top and also down in the description as well. So the question is, did they listen to mine and others' concerns with that watch, and have they rectified them with this new one? So hopefully they have, but we'll get into it and then we'll find out. So first off, I do like that you get a watch roll with it, with the branding on there, and it is useful, so not just a useless box, always good to see. And then we've got the watch, but in the outer box you will also get a link removal tool as well. And here's a closer look at the watch. So I do really like this colour combination, something a little bit different. So they're calling this dial brown, but in reality I think it looks more maroon myself, but it changes a bit depending on the lighting. But I definitely think it's got a bit of a red tinge to it, which is why I'm saying it's more maroon than brown. And then we've got that really nice kind of mint coloured green dial. So I do like the combination of that, kind of like a mint chocolate almost. But if you're not keen on this colour combination, they do have another one which has got a light blue dial and then a darker blue bezel. So if this is a bit too weird for you, that'll probably suit you better. So now let's talk about the dimensions. So we've got a diameter of 41mm, thickness of 12.3, lug width of 20, and then the all important lug to lug is coming in at 46.7. So that is nice and compact, should fit quite a few different wrist sizes despite it being 41mm. When it comes to the weight, on the supply bracelet, with all the links included, it's coming in at 144 grams, and then size for my 7-inch wrist, about 135. So now let's take a closer look at that, starting with the clasp. And we've got the WM branding on there. Perhaps it would have been nice to have just the logo. We've got plenty of micro adjust there, so sizing won't be an issue. Double pushes, milled clasp. And then when it comes to the case back, you can see we've got a display one, which I personally don't really know why they bothered, because it is just an NH35 movement, so not really anything exciting to see there. Personally, I think it would have been better just to have a nice solid case back with a nice WM branding on there. Perhaps have it embossed or something. And now around here you can also see as well, that isn't actually a proper beads of rice bracelet, it is just a 3-piece, because those centre sections, the beads of rice bit is just 1 piece. That being said though, it does still look quite good I think, so it doesn't bother me too much. So I've got a mixture of brushed and polished, so the beads of rice section is polished and then the outer bits are brushed. And then on the edges of them, they are polished as well, and as I said earlier, just push pins because you get a link removal tool in the box. But now let's move on to the head of the watch and talk about that in a bit more detail. So you can see we've got a nice sign crown there with that WM logo, nice bit of curvature to the case as well. Fairly plainly finished, all brushed on the sides, and then on the top of those lugs we have actually got a little bit of polish in there, just to break it up a little bit. Nothing too fancy here, but it works well and it looks quite good. When it comes to that bezel, you can see we've got some nice polished details on there as well. It's a fairly thin bezel, and you can also see as well, we've got a perfectly flat crystal on there. We'll be checking in a bit if that is sapphire. But now let's get a closer look at the dial and talk about that. So it might not be immediately apparent, but it is actually a textured dial. And as I said, with this one I've got, it's like a mint green colour, so it's quite subtle. And then when it comes to the branding, we've got an applied logo there with that WM. No text, just the logo. Definitely my preferred way of doing it. And then down at the bottom, just above the 6, we've got automatic 100 metre wall resistance. So they've not overly cluttered it with text on the dial, which I do appreciate. When it comes to the chapter ring, that's also quite interesting, because it's not just a plain white one. I'm not entirely sure what colour I'd call this, kind of like a brass kind of colour almost. But either way, I do think it suits the colour combination overall with the dial and the bezel. When it comes to the indices, they are applied, but as you can see they've got a slightly odd colour to them. They're not perfectly white, they're kind of like an off-white almost, which is a bit of a strange choice considering it contrasts with the hands, which are actually white. But we'll get into that in more detail when we talk about the Lume. When it comes to the proportions on the hands, I think they've got that pretty much spot on. Perhaps they could have made the minute hand a bit thicker maybe. When it comes to the second hand, you can see we've got that paddle on there, so we've got a decent amount of lume hopefully, and we've also got that little red tip on it too. I think they've done a pretty good job with the dial overall, and I do like the combination of the dial colour and that bezel colour. And I think the colour they picked for the chapter ring kind of ties it all together quite nicely as well. So the only other thing we've got on the dial is that date window at the 3 o'clock. As you guys know, I prefer it down in the 6 personally, but I think it's done fairly well on this. That border around it, but you probably want to know now, is that crystal on there sapphire? So let's check that out now and find out. Using the trusty diamond selector tool. So we'll start with the front. And yep, that is sapphire, so that's good to see. Quickly check out the back. And that is just mineral. Not really that surprising. Plus, you don't realistically need sapphire on the back, as your wrist is going to be in the way of it anyway. So now let's talk about the movement, and as you've seen it's an NH35, so got a nice screw down crown on this, so unscrew that, Easy to use, no issues with that. Pop it out to the first position, change the date, pop it out to the second position, second hand stops, so we've got hacking, and then obviously we can just change the time, and then pop it back in, second hand re-engages, hand winding, all works well, no issues whatsoever, rock solid movements, albeit fairly basic. So now let's get onto the bezel. So it's 120 click ceramic bezel. I'll show you that in action now. So pretty nice clicky action. 0 backplay. And it's just the right amount, it's not too light, not too tight. When it comes to the alignment, that's spot on as well. Just zoom in, show you that. And despite the bezel being quite thin, as you saw, I didn't have any issues using it at all, so you've not got to worry about that. But now let's get onto the Lume and see what I was kind of alluding to earlier with the discrepancy between the indices colour and the hands colour. So you can see we've got a bit there already, but let's charge it up, give it a proper chance. And there you go. So initially at least it's looking pretty impressive. Hopefully this is going to come up on camera, but we have actually got two different types of Lume on here. So on the indices and the Lume pip, we've got BGW9, but on the hands we've actually got C1. So yeah, you heard that correctly, C1, not C3. So that isn't known to be as bright as C3, so that could be a bit of an issue, depending on how much they've actually put on, that is. Hopefully they've put enough on to compensate for that. But initially at least it's all looking fairly consistent, and there's no patchiness either, so that's always good. But the question as always is, what is the longevity like? Are those hands going to fade quicker than the rest? Let's speed it up now and find out. So to begin with, not a great deal of change, but as we get on, you will notice that the hands do start to fade a bit quicker than the indices in that Lume pip, which obviously isn't ideal. I'm not entirely sure why they went with different Lume on there. Personally, I'd have preferred it just to be all BGW9, or if you are going to use something different on the hands, make it C3 instead of C1, so it is a similar brightness. It's a bit of a shame really, because the BGW9 is actually pretty decent, not great, but the C1 is letting it down. And obviously because it's on the hands, that really isn't ideal. So apart from that Lume, it's actually not looking too bad overall, but obviously it's not perfect. There's definitely things that will be changing. So now let's go over the pros and cons and show you what it's like on wrist as well. So here it is on my 7-inch wrist. And as I said at the start of the video, I think it looks really good. And despite the bracelet not being a real beads or ice one, it still wears nicely and I think it looks good too. Still got a good amount of articulation there. When it comes to the clasp, as I said, I would have preferred to have seen that logo there instead of just the WM, but you should be able to get the perfect fit with that good level of micro adjust though. But for me, this watch is just all about the looks. I think it looks really good, and it's something a little bit different with this colour combination as well. I really like that textured dial. It's nice that we've got a 120 click ceramic bezel, sapphire crystal, that rock solid NH35 movement. When it comes to the issues though, the biggest one for me is the Lume they've used on the indices and the hands. I don't know why they used different ones, just use the same on both, so the indices are the same colour when they're not at night. Because at the moment they look a bit odd. You've got that off-white on the indices, but then you've got that white on the hands. And obviously when it comes to night, those hands fade quicker because they've only got C1 instead of C3. So if you insist on using different Lume on both, use C3 instead of C1. But personally, I'd prefer to have just seen all BGW9 or all C3. There's a couple of other little things that I'd personally change, but I don't know whether I'd call those issues. Like I'd like to have seen a beads or ice bracelet as opposed to one that just looks like it, but again that'd bump up the price, so I kinda get why they didn't. As always, I prefer to have the date window down at the 6, but again, just personal preference. So I guess it comes down to whether you're really into your Lume. If Lume is really important to you, obviously this watch is no good for you whatsoever. If it isn't really a big thing for you, and you can deal with the indices and the hands being a different colour, even during the day, then yeah, I'd recommend this, because I think it's got some good specs overall, and as I say, it's a smart looking piece. Particularly for me, in this colour combination. I'd like to see them do a V2 of this though, where they just sort out the Lume on those hands and indices, and then I think I'd recommend it to most people. They're definitely headed in the right direction though. Over the previous watch that I checked out, they've definitely sorted out the major issues I had with that one, and it wears really nicely on a lot of different wrist sizes, this one I think, because that nice compact lug to lug and the curvature to the case as well, and those female end links. So if you are still interested in picking one up, link is down in the description as always. That is an affiliate link, does help support the channel, but you don't pay any extra. But that's it for this one guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.